Why are we, lecturers and other UCU members, taking action over our pensions? In short, the changes that are being imposed on our pensions are truly drastic, based on a deeply flawed valuation and insane assumptions. Pensions can seem complicated, but they aren't really. Basically, our pensions fund, USS, needs to make sure it collects enough contributions now to pay off all our pensions in the future. Fair enough. That means it has to predict how much money it will need many decades ahead. So every few years, it evaluates its assets, and if it reckons it's not collecting enough funds now for future payments, it either imposes higher collections now and in the near future, or reduces our benefits, our pay, if you will, our pension when we retire. The reason many of us are putting up a fight now is that what is being imposed on us is really absurd. I could point to several aspects of this, but let me point to four. Firstly, USS can choose when it evaluates its assets. It usually does that every 3 years, which is the legal maximum, but it can pick any date within the 3 years that it chooses. Curiously, USS managers picked the 30th of March 2020 to evaluate USS assets. This is just when COVID had freshly hit us all worldwide. The stock markets were very worried, like us all, and therefore looking much worse than before or since, as you can see from the picture or the graph. I think I can trust you all to grasp that this is possibly the worst possible date to evaluate USS funds since the financial crisis, in terms of it being a very big dip compared to surrounding period. Of course, USS assets looked uncertain on that date. The entire stock market did. In fact, the value of USS assets since that valuation has improved drastically, as I'll show in a minute. But it's pretending that its assets are worth what they were worth in March 2020, and based on that valuation, it is saying that it therefore needs more contributions and it needs to cut our benefits drastically. Secondly, USS has to make assumptions about how its assets will grow in the future. Fair enough. But here it's telling us that its prudent assumptions is that it will grow at the rate shown by the blue line at the bottom of this graph, the nearly flat one, the light blue one. But this is a mad degree of prudence. For one, it's insanely more prudent than USS has usually assumed in previous valuations. All the thinner lines that edge up, that curve upwards, are the assumptions it made in previous valuations. But also, the value of USS assets in August 2021, earlier this year, less than 2 years since the date of that valuation, has already surpassed what USS thinks it will reach in 21-23, based on its prudent asset growth management. That is, at the moment, or rather in August 2021 anyway, the most recent estimate, it had assets worth nearly, well, just over £89 billion, which is already what USS claims it can only predict for 21-23. So it's over a century ahead of schedule. It still claims with this modeling that it's only prudent to assume it will have what it had this August in a century. And actually, that's also what the red line shows on this graph. You can see that assets have grown considerably better than ever assumed in the past. In any case, then, the point here and now is that USS is calculating its future assets on an insanely pessimistic prediction, which has already been proved crazy, as I've just shown. Thirdly, based on these mad numbers, much too prudent assumptions based on perhaps the worst day in the stock market it could pick, the actual changes USS is proposing are just unacceptable. They want to increase the contributions we make to our pensions, even though this risks pushing some universities closer to bankruptcy. But more to the point, they're proposing drastic cuts to our pension, to what we will earn when we retire. I'll skip the full details, some of it's on the slide, the first 3 points. And it does depend on your current salary, your current age, other personal circumstances. But according to the official USS modeler, we can expect an average cut to our pension of between 25 and 33%. That's a lot. And the figures are much worse if you assume that inflation is higher than 2.5% on average. The cuts then come closer to between 40 and 70% if inflation's on average 3.5% in that period. So here's another problem with this. USS is also lowering the limit of how much of all this is pegged to inflation, so that our pensions will only stay pegged to inflation for inflation rates of up to 2.5%, 0.3 on this slide. If inflation goes higher, then for every year it's higher, the real value of our pensions will keep falling. Inflation is already higher now, and the government expects inflation to fluctuate above 4% in the coming year. This could happen a lot during our lifetime. So throughout that time, we're supposed to watch the value of our pensions evaporate. So USS are asking us to pay more in exchange for staggeringly much less when we retire, based on a flawed valuation and insanely prudent assumptions. There are other problems with what they propose, but I'll skip the detail. I just showed you the cuts in benefits, pension pay, if you will, and the proposal on inflation. But also, and sort of fourthly, fourth point, even if we accept that we need to do something about USS's assets, which would mean accepting the valuation on a wrong date, which I've already shown is already a poor choice and based on pessimistic assumptions. Even if we accept those figures, there are other ways to do this. UCU has already made a counter-proposal, but Universities UK, which represents employers, refused to consider them. The USS board, the board that decides, that runs our pension, is composed partly of UCU members, partly of members appointed by Universities UK, and some independents. All UCU members objected to the proposals being imposed, but they were carried by UUK members and independent members alongside. Our union proposed other solutions, but we were ignored. So there, what we have is a crazy valuation date, insanely pessimistic assumptions about asset growth, eye-watering cuts to our expected pension, and all the while no serious consideration of counter-proposals. It makes you wonder whether the USS managers pushing this are either incompetent or cynical. Our pensions are being raided by what could be summed up as greedy capital. What is imposed on us is entirely unnecessary. USS just needs to organize a new valuation based on March 2021, the end of the 3-year period, as it always has done in the recent past, and the problem doesn't exist anymore. But they're choosing to pick a fight with us, and that's why we're taking action. Employment law in the UK is such that we can only take industrial action within our sector, indeed within our place of employment. The kind of fat cat capitalist mentality that is imposing this on us has been and will continue to be applying worsening conditions in many other sectors of the economy. In my view, that needs to be resisted wherever you are. We are facing those pressures now, so we're forced to resist here and now. What would you do if this happened to you or to your parents? If you were being told to contribute more for much poorer pensions based on an obviously flawed valuation and cynically unrealistic assumptions? No one likes to strike. We like our job, we want to work, and let's be clear, we're not paid when we're striking, and that's painful. We have mortgages, families to feed, etc. But would you let such changes get imposed on you without putting up stiff resistance? Either way, remember also that our working conditions are your learning environment. Poorer pay, poorer pensions, poorer working conditions for us mean poorer learning environments for you. So join us, support us, help us resist this for our benefit, for yours, and because this is one of today's sites of resistance to the power of big capital.